All right, what is up, guys? VV back with another video, and in today's video, guys, we got to get straight into this. We got some last-minute cramming for Nationals. Nationals is about 1 week away at the time you're recording this video. Okay, so we got to use today's video to talk about how you can prepare for each matchup, what to look out for in each matchup, and just you just want to give yourself the best chance to win in this tournament if you're going. Okay, this will help out players who just want to know how to play better against the meta as well. So, if you're not going to Nationals, don't worry, it's not for nothing. But for the players who are going to Nationals, hopefully this video will help you out. I will not be able to go to Nationals this year. It is what it is. Maybe next year. We'll have to see how things go. But it's just not in the cards for me this year. No pun intended. Okay, let's get into this. We're going to be talking about purple Luffy, blue-black Sakazuki, and yellow Enel. Okay, so let's just get straight into it. So this is just a random first place list of a large tournament, 500 players. It's a little bit old. It's about 1 month old, but still, it's got all the necessary cards to talk about. And one more thing I do want to say is when it comes to yellow Enel, you might as well attach Katakuri's face to this as well. Because look at all the similar cards in here. It runs Shirahoshi, it runs Beige, it runs Cracker, it runs Sanji, 200 million volts Amaru, Thunderbolt, Yamato, Catakuri, 7 Lin. It runs a lot of the same cards. A lot of the same cards are in Enel and in Catakuri. We're going to talk about Enel, but just understand that Catakuri is in a very similar spot as this. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive straight into it. Guys, read what this leader does. Understand what this leader does. Excuse me. I'm going to summarize what he does real quick, but make sure you know all the ins and outs of this leader and how to play around it. Because if you can play around the leader, Enel, your chances of winning go up by 50% just right away. Because a lot of newer players, they attack into Enel, not understanding that his leader effect is literally just a psycho card effect for his last life. And if you might be thinking like, okay, well, I'll be safe attacking when he has like 1 or 2 cards in hand. No, you're still not. Because understand this, guys. If he has 2 cards in his hand and you attack him for his last life card and he hasn't used his leader's effect yet, and it's a 200 million volts Amaru, he can trash the last 2 cards in his hand to gain a life, and then his leader effect will go off and he'll gain another life. Okay, I might have said that out of order, but just so you understand, that is a possibility. So you have to be very careful and you have to respect his leader effect. Okay, so be very careful when attacking into him. And generally speaking, it is good to keep Enel at around 2 life, like exactly 2 life, so that way he doesn't generate too much value from his Yamato or his 200 million volts Amaru. It doesn't mean you're safe because he can still Thunderbolt, but the point is you're at least playing around it to some extent, trying to get your best chance of winning this game. Okay, number 2 is Gadatsu. Gadatsu, if your opponent is Enel and they do not attack you on turn 2 when it's their first turn to attack you, guess what? There's a very high likelihood they have a Gadatsu in hand. So be very careful of that. Try not to play into it too much. Okay? Next up is triggers. There's about 25 triggers in this deck you're looking at. I think it's 24 or 25 triggers. So what does that mean, guys? It means that 1 out of every 2 cards, there's 50 cards in a deck. So 50% of the time you hit their life, it's going to be a trigger. That's just the odds. That's just the statistics, right? That's just, it is what it is. So you have to be very wary of that. Be very cautious of that. So in other words, if you have removal in hand, you might want to attack first and see what trigger they get. Because if they get a Cracker or a Sanji and you have a card that KOs a 4 or less in hand, perfect. You're going to be able to wipe it off the board, right, with your removal. So try to play around your triggers to the best of your ability. Some triggers you can't play around, right? Like when Beige hits, it hits. It is what it is. And same thing with Thunderbolt. But play it to the best of your abilities, play it to the best of your ability, and just understand that they have 25 triggers. Be ready for it. Okay, next up is real quick before we move on. These 2 cards I have highlighted in particular. These 2 triggers. If Shura or Shirahoshi is on the board, you need to remove these characters. They have to go. At least to the best of your ability, they have to go. I understand some people might think the same way about Cracker, and yes, that is true to a certain extent. Cracker can be a real menace. But if you leave a Shirahoshi on the board, and then they play a Catakuri to put that card back on top of their life, you're in a lot of trouble. Okay, and that's putting it mildly. That is the most politically correct way to say what I'm trying to say. They will think about it for eight Dawn. They will establish an 8,000 power body. Excuse me. They will draw 3 trash 2, and they'll gain a life. Okay, so do not let Shirahoshi sit on the board if you can help it. Okay, Shira's not as big a deal, but still, if you can remove it, you need to. Enel, he has a lot of resilience. Some people are even teching in Luffy into their decks to remove this card, to help them remove cards like Enel. Because remember, his effect is turned off if you have a Luffy character in play. Okay, so I have seen people tech Luffy into their deck to try to get rid of this card. It's probably not a bad idea. I'm not sure if it's worth it. I do think there's probably better ways to deal with it without having to, alter your deck too much. But who knows? We'll have to see in the future. Anyway, long story short, this Enel here, if they leave 7 Dawn active and they're starting to attack with like 5s and 6s, little tiny numbers, and 7 Dawn is active, you need to prepare for them to attack with Enel. You need to assume they're going to play an Enel or at least a Charlotte Linlin. So do understand that. Be looking out for that. That is a 7-cost, 7K rusher. All right? Next up, Catakuri and Yamato. This is why I think it's good to sit around, 2 life, because if you go down to 1 life, then Yamato is going to be able to generate a life for them. But at the same time, if you have a character on the board that you don't want them to remove and you have to knock them down a life to ensure that Yamato cannot KO it, you do what you have to do. Did that make sense, guys? I'm sorry if that didn't make sense. What I'm trying to say is if you have 2 life and Enel has 2 life and you have a 4-cost character on the board you're trying to protect, you might have to attack into them to drop them down to 1 life. So that way, yes, they will gain the life back with Yamato. However, they're not KOing your 4-cost guy with Yamato. Do you understand? Hopefully that made sense. If there's any questions, please don't hesitate to ask in the comment section below. Okay, so Catakuri and Yamato, they are good at turning the leader's effect back on. So you have to be ready for these cards, guys. You have to be ready for these. You can't necessarily play around them too much, but at the same time, you have to adjust your board and go for certain board control, assuming they might play these at any time to go up a life. Okay, it just simply is what it is. Last up is 200 million Voltamaru. If you leave them at 2 life, they cannot use 200 million Voltamaru to tap down your guy. Do not forget that, guys. They have to be at 1 life. Now, yes, they do run Thunderbolt. They can drop down a life if they need to with Thunderbolt. That is true. However, at least do your best. Do your due diligence to play around cards. If they have the perfect hand, guys, they have the perfect hand. It is what it is. You can't get around that, but you need to make sure that you play to the best of your ability. And one of the best ways to do that is through preparation, anticipation, knowing what your opponent has, what they can have, and what they're going to do. Okay, last but not least on Enel here, these are some other cards to expect. Charlotte Brûlée, Elthor, and Catakuri. Or if you want to play Enel in the meta, if you're thinking I want to bring Enel into Nats, okay, these are some other options for you to think about. Elthor especially, because the trigger's Gidatsu. The trigger's Gidatsu's effect, and Charlotte Brûlée is just a strong, trigger blocker with like Sanji. Catakuri, on the other hand, guys, check this out. This is something you need to understand. It's possible. It might not happen often, but listen to this example. Say Enel's at 2 life and his opponent is at 2 life. Okay? Well, Catakuri won't get rush, right? Wrong. If they have this combo, this is what they can do. Thunderbolt to remove one of their blockers. Okay? Play out Catakuri to give him rush, and then they'll turn on their 200 million Voltamaru as well. So you have to be careful for little combos like this. They're not going to happen all the time. Some decks might not even run them, but if you are playing an elf for this tournament, this is a combination you might want to look into that might give you a slight advantage against certain decks. Decks that might be running, something like Borsalino. We'll have to see. All right. Next up, Purple Luffy. This is just a generic list of this one. It's from a tournament from the Eggman's. I found it on Eggman's channel. EggmanEvents.com. Go check him out whenever you get a chance. I'm pretty sure it's I got to check real quick. Yeah, EggmanEvents.com. Go check him out when you get a chance, guys, because he's got a lot of really good stuff on there. This is just the most recent first place list I could find for a Purple Luffy deck that was in more than 100 players. Okay, so let's just dive straight into it. Number 1 is the leader. You cannot starve Purple Luffy. Understand when people say to starve. When you're trying to, the strategy is, gosh, I'm sorry, guys. The strategy is to starve your opponent. You can't starve Purple Luffy, okay? Number one, that strategy has to do with like taking resources from your opponent by not attacking them. So in other words, you're not giving them cards in their hand from their life. Well, Purple Luffy just can do that. He says, oh, you're not going to attack me? Well, that's perfect. I'll just ramp instead. Okay, so you're not going to be able to starve him. Okay, and number two, that's generating him a lot of card draw, right? So, and it's ramping him Dawn. So he's getting to his characters before you, characters like Magellan, which can set you back. So you need to play this as, I would say, I don't want to say as aggressively as possible, but pretty aggressively. Because understand real quick what's going on. If you try to play too defensively, I'm going to skip ahead to number 5 here. If you try to play too defensively and you're going to sell like a 7 or 8 Dawn, or excuse me, a 7 or 8 card hand, guess what? He's going to hit you with a 4-cost law and drop 2 of your cards while establishing a 5k blocker. You can't afford that, okay? You cannot afford that. We'll come back to him in just a second. But against this leader, you need to play, you know, you have to at least poke at him once or twice a turn. Do you understand what I'm saying? While still battling for the board. That's where it becomes very difficult. Okay, number 2 is Magellan. Magellan is a nuisance. There are certain pulls where if they go, how do I say this? If they go second, and they go turn 1 pass, obviously, turn 2, go to 5 Dawn, drop Magellan, and drop you down to 2 Dawn, where you're going to be at 4 Dawn the next turn, that is devastating, and they have a 6k body on the board. It's one of those, you can't play around that, right? But you still have to do your best to mentally prepare for it. Maybe there's a way you can play around it by sideboarding cards in if needed. But yeah, that sometimes decks just get the perfect start, and that's probably one of them for Magellan. Okay, and if y'all got any advice for that, please put it in the comment section below for any of the veteran players. Okay, number 3 is Pauly. 4-cost cards and lower are not safe against this deck. Pauly's going to ramp. He's going to hit a 4 or less. You got to be careful against Pauly. That's really all I have to say about him. Next up is 5-cost blocker Kid. If this is on the board, this is your number 1 priority to KO or to use removal on. If you have removal for cards under 6 Dawn, you need to save it for Eustace Kid here. Okay. Now, if you have something for 7 or higher, you need to save it for the big boys down here, like 7-cost Kid or 9-cost Kaido. But if you have a card that can KO a 6 or less, it probably needs to be saved for Eustace Kid. Okay, if you can help it. Okay, next up is blocker law. We talked about this a little bit. If your opponent attacks you on turn 2, which they're going to do, right? Purple Luffy's going to attack you on turn 2. You have to counter out of it. Just do it. Yes, there is a chance they don't have law. There is a chance they don't have blocker law. But you cannot risk, or I would argue that you should not risk taking the hit and going to 7 cards in hand or more, or what, I don't know, you probably could just have 7 at that point, I think. Whatever the case is, guys, do not go to 7 cards early if you're going to go to 7 from drawing that life, because they're going to drop blocker law on you 9 times out of 10. Just don't even chance it. This is one of the big mistakes people make against purple law, and think about it. It's a drastic mistake, because you're losing 2 cards from your hand. They only played 1 card from hand. They established a 4-cost 5k. You did nothing but trash 2 random cards from your hand. They could have been good cards. They could have been bad cards. Just don't even risk it. Okay, guys? If they swing at you early on, you should counter out early on. Stay under 7 cards. Okay, next up is Kaido. If they're approaching 9, 10 Dawn, guys, or if they're at 8 Dawn and they haven't used their leader's effect yet, you need to be thinking that they're probably going to drop a Kaido on you. Play around it to the best of your ability. Okay, guys, you need to really keep this card in mind when you're playing against Purple Luffy. Last but not least, events and counters. Guys, listen to how many 2K counters this deck has. X-Drake, Ulti, Double Finger, and Khalifa. And then it's running the 0-cost 3K when you 0-cost, trash a card, 3K, and 1 Blast Breath in this list. Guys, that's like 15 ways to counter out. It is very hard to take out these cards on the board, and they will get aggressive with them because they have so much counter power. So if you have removal in hand, like actual 3000 Worlds or, you know, Hound Blaze, whatever deck you're running, if you have cards in hand to remove them, you need to use those. Try to poke the smallest target as much as you can, obviously. Like, for example, if they have a 5k ulti that's tapped on the board, of course attack every single one of your attacks into this ulti to try to remove it. Even if they do use all their counters, that's fine, because you're at least getting them to use their counters, and you're potentially getting one of their characters off the board and trying to battle for the board in that way. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about some cards to expect that might be in other Purple Luffy deck lists, like Sheep's Horn. Guys, this is showing up everywhere right now. 2-cost, rest a 6 or less. Like, yeah, it's Dawn -1, but no one cares because they're going to use this to go for lethal or to go for a character they need to remove. Top Knot's a 2 cost that bottom decks a 4 or less. This is strong as well. But the one that a lot of people are using right now is Sheep's Horn to get around Sabo. So really be looking out for Sheep's Horn, guys. Very, very powerful effect there. And also King. I think the idea is you either run King or you run Pauly. I guess I don't know how else to say it, guys. I think Pauly's probably just a little bit better because they're both going to hit a 4 or less. But Pauly ramps a Dawn. King is technically like 1K 1,000 power stronger. But I don't know. I'm just saying look out for this card as well. But just know that a 4 or less is not safe. And last but not least, it's Franosuke. This is just another 2K counter they like to run. Guys, this could potentially be a 10, if they have 10 Dawn and they attach all 5 Dawn on this character after playing him for 5 Dawn, they can swing for 9K. Right? So you have to be wary of that. You have to be careful of that. Okay, next up is Blue-Black Sakazuki. There's not... This, by the way, this list we're looking at here is the first place list from the most recent tournament from like literally this weekend from Europe. This was the European Nationals first place Sakazuki list. You can bet that a lot of people are going to probably be bringing this list, guys. I can't prove it, obviously, but I would suggest being ready to play against this deck a lot. Okay, so let's talk about it. Let's break it down and see what we can do to get around it, if it's even possible. If anyone has any suggestions in the comment section, please put them down there, or if you have any suggestions, please put them down in the comment section below. So the leader, we know what he does. He's going to give everything -1 whenever, or anything, he's going to be able to attack and -1 something right away. So if, you have to understand that none of your characters are safe against Sakazuki. And we'll talk about that more when we get over to the removal package. So the leader, and he's going to be drawing a card and trashing a card every turn. You need to just assume that Sakazuki has the absolute best hand possible and just make your preparations based on that. You have to, and I understand, guys, there's not always a way to play around it. It is what it is. You have to do your best. You have to mentally prepare for it. Okay, number 2 is the Recycle Engine. If you are running, I have to skip around a little bit. If you're running 3,000 Worlds in your deck or Hound Blazes, whatever you're playing, like if you're playing Sakazuki, make sure you're bottom decking the correct targets. Okay, so in other words, not Borsalino. Okay, Lucci, that's a solid bottom deck target. Rebecca, that's a solid bottom deck target. And Hina. Those are your 3, I would say. And if you guys have other options that you think are better, please tell me in the comment section below. But if I were going on priority status, I think the number 1 cards to bottom deck that are on the field would probably be Hina, then Lucci, then Rebecca. Rebecca's hard to get back. They can only get that back with Manshuri, and most decks only run 1 or 2 of these. So yes, they technically can get it back if they get their Manshuri, but I think you guys get what I'm trying to say here. Save your, if you can, if it's possible, save your 7-cost Borsalinos and your Hound Blazes for the targets I was just saying. Those are the 3 primary targets. After that, priority number 4 and 5 would be like Borsalino, probably Sabo actually, and then Borsalino. So, you got to pick and choose wisely, guys. Don't just remove whatever you can whenever you can. Really make sure you're targeting the correct cards when you're bottom decking. Okay, it is of utmost importance. It is the absolute most important thing in this matchup. Okay, guys. So Recycle Engine, I'm sorry I had to kind of go off on a tangent there, but this can pull back anything that costs 3 to 5, well, and 3 to 7 in Rebecca's case, and then Rebecca can play out a 3 or less with Hina. We all know the combo by now. If you don't know the combo, you're probably not going to Nationals, right? But I guess just, again, I did say that this is good for Nationals and for even players who are trying to learn how to play against the meta. The bottom line is this, guys. Rebecca can grab back Hina or Rob Lucci and do crazy, crazy shenanigans from there. So be very wary of that. Okay, Lucci I just talked about. This card is just going to be able to remove anything, right? For the most part, because of Ice Age, which is -5, and Great Eruption, which is -2, and your leader's -1, and Hina's -4, they're just going to be able to target whatever they need to with Lucci, Houndblaze, or Borsalino. So just make sure you guys understand that right away, okay? But guess what? Borsalino and Houndblaze are not recyclable. Like, yes, technically they are with effects like Manshuri and Lucci, like they can bottom deck them, but that's not what I'm talking about. Excuse me, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how Manshuri and Rebecca can just straight up grab a Hina or Lucci out of the trash and play it that turn if they have enough Dawn, or the next turn, right? So you have to be very wary of that. So Lucci is very strong in that regard. It looks like Sabo is highlighted, but I actually did not mean to highlight him, but I will still talk about him. This is a really strong card to play into into purple Luffy. If you're expecting them, sorry, I gotta go backwards real quick, guys. If you're expecting them to play their Kaido the next turn, guys, it's hard to beat dropping a Sabo on the turn that they're going to reach 9 or 10 Dawn, obviously. So, you know, it is something to think about. Draw 2, trash 2 to cycle your hand, fills it up, and establishes a 6K body. Very strong. Anyway, back to what we were saying. Number 4, Big Borsalino. This is just a very, very powerful bottom deck effect, guys. Very, very powerful. So definitely be anticipating them to drop this whenever they can. But if you're playing if you're playing Sakazuki, guys, you're going to want to save your Borsalino for, like I said, Hina's, Rebecca's, Rob Lucci's. And I know a lot of people might be thinking, like, well, why don't I use my, you know, this is the biggest removal effect we have, right, where he hits a 4 or less. Because remember, Borsalino hits a 4 or less, Houndblaze and Rob Lucci hit a 2 or less, and then Rob Lucci also hits a 1 or less. So mentally, a lot of people think, like, okay, well, I should save this for their biggest character. I've done this. I've had the same thought process before, too. But it's just not correct if you're in the mirror. Like, you need to use this to get rid... I mean, you do what you have to do. Don't get me wrong, guys. If you have to do it, remove what you have to remove. But you need to try to be... You need to think about this logically. The best cards to remove with 7 cost Borsalino are Rebecca, Hina, and Lucci. So that way they cannot keep getting back recurring value. Okay, guys? It is extremely important, okay? Okay, next up is this removal package. I already talked about it a little bit, guys. You know, it's just simply -5 for Ice Age, -5 for Ice Age, -2 for Great Eruption, and, you know, and draw card. This card's massive. This card fills up the trash, -2, and you know, it like reimburses itself. It replaces itself. Extremely powerful. And then of course Houndblaze. Yeah, this removal suite is absolutely disgusting. People already know what this does, so just be looking out for it. Just know that none of your characters are safe. That's the best thing I can say. Whether you're playing purple, yellow, blue, black, red, I don't care what you're playing, green, you name it. None of your characters are safe against Sakazuki, so you need to play around that logic. And one thing that I will say is I think if you put on a strong amount of pressure, not recklessly, don't be reckless about it, but I think if you put on a strong enough amount of pressure against Sakazuki, that's kind of your best bet while still developing the board. Like, make them answer the board while you're also still hurting them, you know, forcing them down. But there's also the strategy of, like, starving them a little bit. It really just depends, guys. It's going to come with a lot of play testing, a lot of practice. And then last but not least is Hina. I've already talked about this a little bit. This is just a card that you want to remove as soon as possible. Like, bottom deck it. Get it out of here. Bouncing it back to hand will not do enough. KOing it will not do enough. Because Rebecca will be able to recycle it and go from there. So, just giving you guys a heads up. Very, very powerful. Okay, some other cards to look at or to look for in this matchup. 10 cost Kaido is what a lot of people run. I feel like they kind of run it over the 3 cost Hina, the blue Hina here that draws a card if you have 5 or less cards in hand. Same thing with Sanji's Pilaf. Like, I feel like these, you kind of have your pick. Do you want to run Hina? Do you want to run Sanji's Pilaf? Or do you want to run Kaido? And again, when I say Hina, I'm talking about the blue 3 cost draw one if you have 5 or less in hand Hina. Okay, and then also Mihawk. Sometimes people will play Mihawk as a 1 or a 2 of, and same thing with Ulti. Excuse me. Some people play Ulti as a 1 of or a 2 of, and guys, this is a very strong card against decks that don't have a lot of removal. Because remember, like I told you, between Sakazuki doing -1, Subaru's a 2K counter that can do -2, Tashigi can do -2 as a 2K counter, Hina -4, all this cost reduction they have. If they stick an ulti, they will remove anything you have. Whatever you have is going bye-bye. Okay, so you do have to be ready for that. You do have to be prepared for that. All right, guys, so that's about it. In my next video, like this might just be a part 1. I don't know if I mentioned that in the beginning of the video. I might make this video into a part 1 of, you know, getting ready for nationals or prepping for nationals, however I end up wording it. And then I might do a part 2 that kind of goes down some really cool choices you could have to go into nationals or into your local meta. You know, some decent off-meta options. Like, I've got meta decks in here too, right? Like, I've got Catakuri, I've got Sakazuki, but there's a lot of off-meta stuff on here as well that might be decent. It might not be, but it might be decent. So I might save that for a part 2. We'll have to see how this video is received. Okay, guys, so that's it. If you have any questions, please list them in the comment section below. I do hope that I helped y'all with this video, especially when getting ready for Nationals or just ready to go to their locals where you're going to play against all these decks all the time. I hope this helped in some way. Yeah, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, please put them down in the comment section below. And that's it, guys. Until next time, peace.